want to do the honors and introduce the film?
Well, sure. The movie we are going to discuss today is Color Out of Space, directed by Richard Stanley, based on the H.P. Lovecraft story, The Color Out of Space. This is Richard Stanley's first feature film in 25 years, something like that.
Yeah, it's like his return to form after his banishment from filmmaking.
Yeah, it's a little self-imposed, he made he made Hardware, which is an interesting film. I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit. Dust Devil, and then he had the true Hollywood experience of getting fired from a big budget movie, The Island of Dr. Moreau. And disappeared. He made a few documentaries, but pretty much just done with filmmaking as far as that goes.
Yeah, and his whole plight with the production of The Island of Dr. Moreau is documented in the 2014 film Lost Soul, which is great. I know you've seen that too, because we've talked about it. Yeah,
it's really interesting how Val Kilmer basically torpedoed that movie for whatever reason. That's a fascinating documentary. You end up feeling pretty bad for Richard Stanley. Although did you ever see the finished product?
Of what?
Of The Island of Dr. Moreau.
Oh, you mean the theatrical release of that film?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's terrible.
It's terrible, and also, obviously, Marlon Brando is totally out of control in that film, too. You know what I mean?
It feels like, I mean, you see this a lot with this would have been great. You watch that documentary, Jodorowsky's Dune, and everyone's just talking about how great that movie would have been. But what it has, a really interesting filmmaker, David Lynch, made a Dune movie, and it stunk. And maybe, there's this tone of the Dr. Moreau documentary that, Richard Stanley would have made this brilliant film. But judging from what you see on screen, you're like, did any version of this, would it have been good? I mean, I guess it's hard to say, but I'm going to probably say no.
I think, all right, I want to speak to the Dune point that you brought up, that I don't think you can make a 90-minute film on the novel Dune. I think that the only way you can tell that story is with a series or a mini series or something like that. And
absolutely.
I'm not even a big fan of Frank Herbert's. I'm not one of those guys who's read all the Dune books. I read the first one, and that was it. I kind of tapped out.
What did you think
about the book?
Yeah,
too much. There's too fucking it's like reading a goddamn thermodynamics textbook or something. It's too much shit, too many I for me it was it was self-indulgent. I thought that book, and I think. And I haven't read any of the other ones. And granted, I think I was 16 when I read it too. But I read all the Lord of the Rings movie. I read all of the Lord of the Rings novels and the Silmarillion prior to that. So I was accustomed to reading dense narrative. And I thought that Dune was very self-indulgent. And, I just was never compelled to read the rest of the books. But I was interested in seeing the film. And I would go see a Dune, series. I would watch that for sure. But I think that at the time that it was made, that David Lynch had the cards stacked against him to make a good film with that, what he had to work with.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I tried. That's great you made it through Dune. I tried to read it. I realized it got 50 pages in and didn't retain one single thing that happened.
Yeah.
If someone just said, what just happened 3 pages ago? I don't know. So I was like, this is not for me. And a filmmaker I really love and admire has a Dune movie coming out this year, Denis Villeneuve, who did the Blade Runner sequel, did Enemy, did Prisoners. And he's someone I always look forward to what he's doing. And this kind of seems like, I don't know how interested I am in a 2-hour Dune movie. Like you said, how can you really tell that story in 2 hours?
I'm definitely going to see it for two reasons. Because I haven't given up on being able to digest Dune, and maybe after seeing like a decent version of it on the film, you know, in a film format, it'll inspire me to try to read the book again. Because I like challenges like that. You know what I mean? Because like
Sure.
I never felt like I'm like, man, you know, what was it me? You know, like that I couldn't get into it, because I generally love, like, that seems like it's right up my alley. You know, but
Right.
anyway, I feel like
Well,
maybe Jodorowsky would have made a 4-hour film or something, and it would have been cool. I don't know.
yeah, hard to tell. And speaking of dense writing, this movie we're about to talk about is based on an H.P. Lovecraft story, who has a pretty dense way of writing himself. I would say. Have you read the story, or are you a fan of Lovecraft?
I love H.P. Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft
Nice.
was one of the first few writers that really grabbed my imagination when I was a kid. I mean, it was, I can tell you right now, it was like when I was like just getting into reading. It was J.R.R.
So when you were
Tolkien.
like 35?
Yeah, when I was 35 and I learned how to read, you know. So it was J.R.R. Tolkien, Robert E. Howard, the guy who wrote Conan and a bunch of other stuff. Through Robert E. Howard, I discovered H.P. Lovecraft, because a lot of the names of the gods and stuff from the Howard's books were part of H.P. Lovecraft's universe that he created. And those three writers were huge impacts on me when I was a kid. And in addition, there's Michael Moorcock, the British writer who wrote, Elric and all this other stuff, and was a big influence on Blue Oyster Cult and, whatever.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
yeah.
So the Robert E. Howard Lovecraft thing, weird fiction, all that pulp stuff, that was like very much in my head when I was like a young kid.
Yeah, I discovered Lovecraft through my mother was a big she read all like Stephen King and Dean Koontz and kind of like the airport writer kind of shit, but I discovered H.P. Lovecraft through Stephen King, who mentions him quite a bit, and he was little descriptions of his short stories and things like that. And I do remember reading Color Out of Space on tour. I can't remember which one, and thinking this was one of his better stories, and someone's going to make a movie of this. And here we are.
Apparently, it was one of H.P.'s favorite stories too.
That's it's been a while, so it's not fresh in my head. I know there's a lot of differences from the movies, and the story kind of just takes the overall plot and idea, but like changes a lot of things. I remember, like, I thought he had all sons.
Yeah, he did. There was no female. It was he had two sons. The name of the family was correct, the Gardner family, but all their first names were different. I don't remember what the first names were, but they were like these very New England, like British, English kind of like, old timey names that everyone had in the book. And,
right. Even the spelling of color is like the old English way.
Yeah, with the U, Colour. Yeah. And and also the duration of the story took place over, I think, an entire year in the Lovecraft short story, and it sort of expanded out beyond just the family, which they kind of hint at in the movie that it's actually growing. You know what I mean?
Right, and that's a very, like, a theme Lovecraft hits a lot of, like, at the end of the story, someone went through something that drives them to madness and has witnessed what will be the end of civilization as we know it. It's pretty common, I think, in Lovecraft's writing.
Yeah, one of the really cool things about the film, though, is that I think that there's been a lot of attempts to adapt Lovecraft to film, and some of it's successful, some of it successful in a different type of way than actually telling the stories, like the Stuart Gordon films, Dagon and The Reanimator, From Beyond, are, I would say, inspired by Lovecraft and taken into a completely different direction, that the filmmaker is more in line with his vision than the vision of H.P. Lovecraft.
Right.
And there's
Dagon is.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say Dagon is more of a adaptation of The Shadow over Innsmouth than it is the story Dagon.
Yeah.
Which I that's my favorite of the Stuart Gordon adaptations. I have a soft spot for that movie. I don't know why, but I love it.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, I love all three of those, and I like Stuart Gordon in general. And I think, but they're not like the story though. You know what I mean? They're not exactly faithful to Lovecraft's like vision. You know?
Right. I totally agree with that. I would say John Carpenter made three very like Lovecraftian films, but are not actually based on anything he's written.
Oh yeah, well The Thing, totally, yeah. That's like, I mean, that's what comes to mind right away.
Yeah, I would say The Thing, the Prince of Darkness, and of course, In the Mouth of Madness. I think is his most overly Lovecraftian film, which is also probably my favorite John Carpenter movie.
In the Mouth of Madness.
Yeah, I love it. Love that one. Saw that in the theater when in high school. I think probably his last great one too.
I think that Color from Outer Space is, you could say that is the kind of precursor to all science fiction that has to do with like meteors hitting the planet Earth and like giant like ants, like all those films from like the 50s where there's something like The Blob, like even The Blob, you could even say is a descendant of Color from Outer Space. You know what I mean? Because there's like this alien presence or something. You know what I mean? There's like that. That's kind of that motif is something I think that didn't exist. Because you got to remember, like this story was written in 1927. Okay, you know, and you know, science fiction at that time really wasn't on that page per se. You know, there wasn't a lot of this kind of. I mean, there was. The age of the pulps, you know, and amazing stories and, you know, all that sort of stuff was going on. And
right.
I think that this movie really is kind of the alpha of all this stuff. You know what I mean? It just is where it started, really, a lot of these types of stories. So things like, you know, The Thing, you know, Prince of Darkness, because in Prince of Darkness, it kind of touches on how the devil, you know, Satan is another sort of entity from a different dimension or something. And I think that concept is a very Lovecraftian concept where there's like all these ideas about religion and the supernatural are actually these kind of ultra science from different civilizations or different, you know, dimensions and things like that, you know, cosmic sort of entities.
And they have this apocalyptic ending.
Yeah, definitely. You know, there's like, you know, the end of the world and also how humanity really doesn't figure into any of the agendas of these entities. You know, they're just like, you know, this kind of sidebar of their agenda. You know, they don't give a fuck at all about the human race or planet Earth or anything. They're just incidental to these alien beings. You know, and that's like the kind of the takeaway I get from a lot of his writing is like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That we're insignificant. And, you know, Lovecraft was a very fearful, I guess if he was around today, people would call him problematic kind of guy.
Yeah.
He was afraid of like everything. He didn't like music. He feared the ocean. He probably feared things coming from space. But all of that comes, he was completely racist. All of his weird odd ticks and things really come through in his writing. Like he had a distaste for music. Really just seems like if he was around today, he'd be some basement dwelling like neckbeard on like 4chan or something.
Probably, yeah. Yeah, but I saw at the Salem Horror Fest last year. I went up to that, and you know, and Jacqueline and I went for a few days to the Salem Horror Festival, and there was a a documentary about H.P. Lovecraft that we watched, and it
I think I've seen that. Yeah,
it was great, man. It was fucking amazing. I'm probably going to try to find it on Blu-ray or something, and it's great. It talks a lot about his sort of, fear of the other, like, and his racism, and, it's not, it just kind of frames it in this way where he's this guy who just wanted to stay in one place, and he was afraid of everyone, and that's why he had these, like, fears of immigrants, and he lived in Brooklyn for a brief period with his Jewish wife, and it was sort of submerged in this world where there was the other speaking strange languages and had bizarre, well, at least to him, unfamiliar cultures, and that fed directly into his, sort of xenophobia, and late in life, he actually laments the fact that he wasn't more worldly in his worldview, that he didn't accept other people. So there was a little bit of regret based on some of the information available about him. So, the guy definitely had some, unsavory views, and similar to Von Trier, I think that he, who we're going to talk about later in his house that Jack built, he, I think that you can't throw away his art because you don't like the guy. You know what I mean?
Sure. And that's a point I've made many, many times. Bad people can make great art. Yeah. And a lot of times great art is made by kind of shitty people.
You're a bad guy, and I'm
a fucking terrible person. But I'm a base god.
But in general, I like your music, even though you're a bad guy. So
yeah, well, yeah, I would agree with that assessment. I would say the same thing about you. And they're like, "What's it like doing a podcast with Mike?" I'm like, "Oh, he's a piece of shit." but he's great to talk about movies with. So
yeah, totally.
And Tunes is awesome. So here we are with Color Out of Space. I got some mixed feelings about this one, man.
Okay. I want to hear what you have to say.
Okay, well, I'll start with, it begins, I love the opening shot of the trees. Like, I feel like we're about to watch, it has a very, Terrence Malick sort of feel to it. It's a shot of nature with this voiceover, and you kind of go through the woods, and almost immediately one of the first problems in the movies arises for me. Richard Stanley's handling of actors and the way they talk to each other is very stilted and unnatural in this movie. I think the movie is beautifully shot. It's got a lot of interesting ideas. But anytime there's a scene of two people talking to each other, it feels really unnatural to me. And especially within the family, between the mother and Nicolas Cage. And right off the bat, I got to point out, I think Nicolas Cage is in a completely different movie than the one Richard Stanley is making. Did you get that at all? I mean, we talked about Nicolas Cage the last time about how a great director can really bring out a great performance. Maybe it's a great performance. He's doing his crazy Nicolas Cage thing. But here, he's doing this, I don't know what the fuck he's doing. The first part of the movie, he's doing this, oh, gee, shocked, I'm a good dad. And it's so goofy and unnatural, almost like he's acting in a comedy.
Yeah, I had, one of my only criticisms of the film is some of the dialogue, for sure. And the directing of Nicolas Cage, I think, could have been done. He could have given him a little bit more guidance as to, what he's supposed to be doing in the film as, Nathan Gardner, It's more of well, here's Nicolas Cage in this H.P. Lovecraft film. It didn't feel like Nathan Gardner to me. You know what I mean?
No, exactly. And, it would seem to be like Nicolas Cage wanted to do this. This seems something that's up his alley. He's into horror movies and comic books and stuff. This seems like something he wanted to do. So I don't think he was just phoning it in with this. I think he had some ideas that he wanted to bring to the table, and I think his instincts were completely wrong. Sort of like the Wicker Man remake, which is a project I know was close to his heart. And I've defended that movie in the past. I don't think it's nearly as awful as people say think it is. There's some positives to it, but Nicolas Cage is the main problem in that movie. He's gone completely off the rails and doesn't know what movie he's in anymore. And I think he's doing a very similar thing here with this. I mean, that whole scene of, sorry about the smell. This meteor stinks. Like, he's just overdoing it. It's so unnatural. And there's a lot of things I noticed, even like, the first 20 minutes of the movie that don't, the daughter's a witch. It doesn't really go anywhere.
Well, I liked that because I like the fact, well, all right, number one, I agree with you 100% about Nick Cage. And I also believe that some of the dialogue, like maybe he needed some supplemental script writing with the dialogue to help out with some of that stuff. It seemed clunky, kind of unrealistic, I feel like, once again, Lovecraft is like hard to adapt to film because in the books or in the stories, not a lot of action actually happens. It's all told like as like flashbacks or whatever. You know what I mean?
Right. Not a lot of dialogue between people either.
Not a lot of dialogue. So a lot of dialogue has to be formulated if you're going to make a film out of a Lovecraft story. Now, with all that said, this film is a Richard Stanley film. And but at the same time, it faithfully conveys the vibe of a Lovecraft story, in my opinion. And but the part of the film that is Richard Stanley is the occult and the witchcraft stuff, because that's very much part of what he is about. You know what I mean? That's like kind of his chaos magic and all that kind of stuff. And he kind of flexes his muscles a little bit with his knowledge when they talk about Gardnerian Wicca and like all this kind of stuff in the beginning, like when the surveyor rolls up on Lavinia, and she's doing a ritual, and I don't know. I thought that part was kind of endearing, that there was like a young girl who's into witchcraft, and it was kind of like this like alternative, because that's kind of him, that's his style, and I thought it was cool that she's on the back of a horse with a cape, and I feel like Lavinia was actually Richard Stanley in the film. You know what I'm trying to say? Yeah,
like I'm surprised she wasn't wearing a cowboy hat and a duster.
Yeah,
exactly. Like if you notice in his, like when I saw him in the documentary, I'm like, oh, this explains like Dylan McDermott wearing like a duster and
exactly.
He looks like one of the characters in his film. So yeah, okay, I'll give you that. Like, it didn't have much to do with the movie, but. Yeah. That's fine. There's this thing where the mayor comes to check out the meteor. No one seems, at all shocked that something from space it came and landed in the farm. Everyone's very nonchalant about it. And then the mayor, I think it was, goes, "Oh, you should have sold me this farm when I offered to buy it." Like, that goes nowhere. You think is this character going to come back? It has something to do with the story. It really doesn't. And one of my other main problems with the movie was a lack of rules. Like, the meteor lands and some people start acting weird, some people don't. You know what I mean?
Well, it kind of hit everyone differently too, and
right, like,
and it affected all the animals and the flora and stuff like that too.
Yeah, the alpacas, which was what? Yeah, there's a scene where the kids, like the parents have gone off to the hospital because the mother chopped her fingers off. And so the kids are around this meteor a lot, but they seem to be relatively fine. But Nicolas Cage and the mother gets back after being away from the meteor for like a day, and he immediately starts acting like a madman. That struck me as really weird, and that's, again, another really turning point in Cage's performance where he completely acts with a different accent. Did you catch that?
Oh yeah, well that's not the first time I've seen that in different films. I don't know if you've ever seen
Bad Lieutenant.
yeah, Port of Call,
Yeah.
New Orleans, where he's like all over the map with his accents, man.
Yeah, but in that, it worked. Like, that movie is funny. I think it's supposed to be taken as satire. Here, like, I was like, I even wrote down, is he doing a Trump impression? Like, he gets back from the hospital, what's going on? He really, I laughed. Like, what the fuck? Is this an outtake? It was such a bizarre choice to make. That's kind of what, again, like, I was like another big derailment in the movie for me, which is right around the halfway point.
I mean, yeah, I agree with a lot of that stuff, definitely. However, the fact that everyone was affected differently, I just kind of took that as, you know, certain that's like part of maybe the psychology of the person too, you know? I mean, obviously there was there was some kind of thing going on. The mother has cancer. There's like doubts. They had just moved out to the country. They were like obviously city people. There was a thing with you know, Nathan Gardner and his father about not becoming his dad. You know, that kind of thing. Right. There was a lot more life that the mother and father had, you know, that Nathan Gardner and his wife, I believe her name is Teresa Gardner, have lived than the kids. You know, the kids are just relatively, you know, 15, 16, 18, under 20 years, you know. Yeah. One of the kids was literally a kid. You know, it's like probably 9 years old. Right. And I just think, I mean, I don't know. I read into that as being like this entity affecting people differently based on some of the internal stuff that might have been going on with them, you know?
Right. I got that. It just seemed like you didn't really get to know the family that well before everything starts happening. It's not like a ton of like development with the family. So maybe that's where my confusion of that stemmed from. But yeah, there's just a lot of weird aesthetic choices. Like there's an alpaca milking scene. It's slightly off-putting. But there is a lot to like. This is very much, like you said, this is a Richard Stanley film. Like, I feel like if this came out in like 1990, 1989 or something like that, this would probably be revered as like some sort of classic.
Yeah,
like this
absolutely.
Exact movie.
Yeah.
You know, shot on film in the 80s or 90s. Like, people would look at it the same way as they look at, you know, Reanimator. But made today, like, you know, the filtered dialogue, some of the, actually, I was going to say cheapness of it, but I got to say, this movie looks really, really good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's stunning. I think a lot of it is, like, stunning, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination of practical effects and digital effects, and they're not the best, but it doesn't completely take you out of the movie. Like, you have that alpaca monster somewhere towards the end that looks like sort of out of The Thing, or even The Void.
Yeah, well, both of those references are true, in my opinion, yeah.
Right. So there's a lot to admire about the movie. I liked the music a lot.
The score was amazing, I thought, yeah.
Colin Clutson, I believe his name was. Yeah, this doesn't feel like a guy who's been away from the game for 25 years. This is, aside from performance issues, it's confidently made and it looks beautiful. You see like the meteor changing the color of everything, changing the animals. It all looks really good. And I love the sort of manicness of the ending that lasts, 15 minutes or so, where it just goes completely crazy. I thought it was great, had a great energy to it. And that final shot of the camera going up and you see the title of the movie across. I thought that was a really just perfect ending.
Yeah, and
so
the ending, to me, I don't know, it was weird. It was like I got super choked up at the ending because of the monologue of I believe the character's name was Ward, who was the surveyor. And in the story, he was unnamed. Like there was no name associated with the narrator in the story. And the beauty of the way H.P. Lovecraft uses language, and the way that monologue at the end, like it was essentially the same final paragraphs of the story. It got very emotional for me, man, because like I was just like, I'd watched this, what I thought was a great film, and it made me very feel like I felt something, you know what I mean? I thought it was great. Like the ending just captured it,
Sure, and I gotta point out the mother-son creature as being one of the most unsettling things I've seen in a film. The mother-son sort of body horror creature thing, that's up there as one of the most disturbing things I've seen in a movie in a long time.
Equal to the visual of the mother-son hybrid was the sound, like those wails. It was like really hard to watch that scene, and I felt like, when's it gonna end, man? I wanted to go in there and kill that fucking thing so it just stopped wailing,
Yeah, and then when finally he puts him out of his misery, it's this really sad moment, and then like you don't expect the movie to have like the emotional weight that it has.
Yeah, that's but that was a really good use of CGI and practical, and yeah, I don't know, it was cool.
But overall, like, is this like a movie you would recommend to people? Like, would you give it like a passing grade? I mean, you seem to like it a little bit more than I did.
Yeah, I loved it. I thought it was great. I look past the shortcomings because I'm just a fanboy. Like I'm totally. I mean, I admit it. I'm a fanboy of Richard Stanley's, and I'm also an H.P. Lovecraft enthusiast. And Hardware and Dust Devil also have some shortcomings too, but I love both of those films as well. So I give it. Like,
yeah, Hardware is an interesting one because there's like a lot. Like, it's a big world that he's sort of hinting at, and he tells this very small story of a girl being stalked by a robot and a creepy fucking neighbor.
Yeah. I think that I would like to see a sequel to Hardware, actually.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much you can do with that post-apocalyptic, cyberpunk, I believe was a word people were using around that time, the 90s,
probably, yeah.
The 1990. There's a lot you can do with that world, and it's too bad they kind of killed off the one of the main characters. I'd like to see more adventures of Dylan McDermott in a duster.
Well,
and
but the Mark V, I mean, that there could be more of those robots out there. That's the thing,
Right. Yeah, and Richard Stanley has kind of mentioned a Lovecraft shared universe. Now, like, shared universe is a term that's really gotten old with me. Everyone's trying to do that after the success of the Avengers. Everything's trying to be the shared universe. And they tried to do that with the Universal Monsters, with that Tom Cruise movie, The Mummy, which I guess I didn't see, but by all accounts, it was an abysmal piece of shit. And when you try to jumpstart a franchise before it's even begun, that's a problem. You don't know how people are going to react. That said, I wouldn't mind more Lovecraft adaptations. They don't necessarily need to exist in this world of this movie, but I think more Lovecraft, more Richard Stanley, I would say that's a good thing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, even within Lovecraft's canon of work, there's like Cthulhu and the old ones, like all this. He has his own universe just integral to his stories that I think, you could make It doesn't have to be like the Avengers where there's like super villains or whatever, but it could be a common mythology that laces all the movies together, you know?
Right. Absolutely. And it's a tough sell, you know? I don't know if you remember, like 5 years ago, Guillermo del Toro was setting up The Mountains of Madness with James Cameron producing and Tom Cruise starring, and couldn't get that off the ground.
Nah,
and that's
that would have been terrible.
Those are three really. You think so?
Yeah, Tom Cruise, man. I don't know, man. You know, it's like.
Well, you got to look at who's behind the camera. Guillermo del Toro, obviously a big fan of Lovecraft. I think he would do the story justice, and Tom Cruise clearly wanted to make that kind of movie because he, went ahead and made The Mummy
right
a couple of years after. But yeah, again, there's no telling like what all the maybe it would have been great, maybe it wouldn't have. Maybe Tom Cruise would want to be jumping out of helicopters and shit.
Yeah, maybe they would have
and make it more of an action.
They'd have a helicopter in the movie where he could, do some like stunts or something like that.
Yeah, he could throw like a Dianetics out at people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Lovecraft stuff is always open to interpretation. It's tricky, but it can be done right. I mean, there is definitely parts of Color Out of Space that were very Lovecraftian.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'd like to see more, and I hope it's not 25 years before Richard Stanley makes another movie, and I hope the next movie he makes has a guy with a duster and a cowboy hat.
Well, yeah, man. I mean, there's a guy like that. That's like his, like I said, in Hardware, the beginning. That was Carl McCoy from Fields of the Nephilim, the guy who walked across the desert, and found the Mark V robot. Yeah.
There's a lot of nods to like music, from our shit we like.
Yeah.
There's Motorhead. There's Public Image Limited.
Yep. Iggy
there's really
Pop's
cool
voice is in it.
Iggy Pop. Yeah, it's a cool, weird little movie. I don't think many people know it exists.
Yeah, well, people got to go. We should do the next thing we do. We should do a retrospective on Stanley's work. I think that'd be cool to cut back into those other two films as well. But
sure. I mean, I could talk about that creepy neighbor guy for like an hour.
Yeah. And Richard Stanley, he has like a relationship with Fields of the Nephilim because he's done several of their music videos, and like I said, he had Carl McCoy act in the opening scene of Hardware, and
right,
and he looks like Richard Stanley himself looks like a member of Fields of the Nephilim with his duster and hat and everything,
Yeah, he's South African, right?
Yeah, South Africa. Yep.
But. Right, they were like raised in London or something. Because I remember like watching that documentary. Like he had like a kind of a strange accent. Wasn't quite like completely British.
Yeah, it's a South African kind of thing. And I guess he lives in France now. I think.
You there?
Yeah, I'm still here. He lives in France, I believe.
Say that again. Sorry.
I guess he lives in France now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Do you know where they filmed Color Out of Space?
That's a good question that I don't have the answer to, unfortunately.
Yeah, me neither. I'm sure I could look it up, but
yeah.
Again, it had to be somewhere. It's probably like Georgia, since that's where everything's filmed nowadays.
Yeah, I think that somehow I think you're right about that. So.
Right. But
so anyway,
okay, overall, like final.
Yeah, I give it a 5 out of 5 because that's just me, and I understand if someone else would give it less than that, but
I would go. I thought a lot about it. I would go 2.5.
Ooh, really?
Out of 5, maybe 3 with another viewing. Like I said, there's a lot to like, but there was just, like I said, that the acting was kind of bad, and it just didn't completely work for me. That said, I think I would recommend that people watch it because it feels like it's going to be divisive, and it will get people talking. This is going to be a movie people want to debate. I would think, because I think people are going to feel strongly about it on either side. I just kind of fell in the middle.
Yeah.
It's an interesting movie, but it just didn't completely work for me. I think you put a different actor as the father, maybe even like Dylan McDermott, you know, he would have been a good choice.
Actually, that's a good point. Yeah.
And I think I would give it a higher rating. There's still some, you know, weird the way people interact is a little stilted even without Nicolas Cage, but I think it's worth seeing. It just wasn't the home run I was hoping for.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I saw the house that Jack built, man. I was totally fucking blown away by it.
Yeah, you liked it, huh?
I loved it, man. I thought it was great.
I had a feeling you would. It's actually, wow.
Yeah.
Same day or different days?
Back-to-back days. One day, and then I rewatched it the second day.
That's, yeah. We talked about it a little bit on the last podcast, and I was truly surprised you hadn't seen it, because that is just like right up your alley.
It wasn't like I avoided it. It just was one of those things that just I like never got around to seeing it, and then other movies come out, and you know, and then it just I had always intended to see it, you know.
Right. Yeah. Did you see the director's cut or the regular cut?
I saw the director's cut.
I'm not sure what the differences are, as I've only seen like the regular cut. I've read some comparisons, and I guess like I think it's the fifth murder is a little bit more where he murders his girlfriend. I think it's more brutal. I read.
There's a lot of stuff that went on in that scene that was like very brutal, aside from the actual murder, I thought.
Right. I mean, that was difficult to watch in the regular cut. I don't know if I can handle more of that, but I think I'll eventually get around to seeing it.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, it's a really interesting film, the structure of it. And when you think it's gone on too long, you get to this amazing epilogue that takes place in hell.
Yeah, it's fucking amazing, man. Love it.
It was, and it's really, he goes like full on Lars von Trier in those moments. And I love that he's kind of talking to someone throughout the entire movie. You're not sure who, and the end it ends up being what the devil or.
Well, it's we can talk about
a guide through hell.
It's Virgil from Dante's Inferno.
Oh, see, yeah. I'm an idiot. I didn't even pick up on that.
Yeah, you got
to read his name is Virgil.
You got to read some books, man. You know?
They made a book out of that.
Yeah.
Like it's a unique structure. It's a brutal film to get through, but it's definitely rewarding, and it's got so many of Lars von Trier's hallmarks. Like, it's shockingly violent and upsetting, but up against this kind of comedic aspect. Like, there's a little bit of humor to the whole thing.
Yeah, it's like darkly humorous, definitely, and it's there's a lot of satirical like stuff, because I've watched like a bunch of interviews with von Trier, and he talks about his fascination. He's never been to the United States. I don't know if you knew that or not.
Yeah, he's terrified of flying.
Yeah,
and I believe he made a couple films critical of the United States.
Well, I even think this one is, because there's a lot of discussion about how Jack is like an allegory for Donald Trump, and especially in light of the impeachment hearings, where Trump basically is daring our legal system to prosecute him, and they just won't. They find a way not to fuck this guy over. The same way Jack is daring the police to like arrest him, you know? And there's this like boorishness that he has that's very similar to Donald Trump. And like, you know, in that fifth murder with his girlfriend, he goes down and he's like yelling at the cop, you know, and the girlfriend is like saying, "This guy's after me, he's going to kill me." And he's like, "Everything this woman says is true."
It's true. Yeah.
And it's like, basically, you know, Donald Trump is saying that all the shit that you guys say about me is true. So fucking do something about it. And our system is such a fucking mess that no one can actually do anything about it, or no one has the balls to like stand up and fucking stand up for what's right in this country, you know?
Yeah. Apparently Mitt Romney is the only Republican who's sane right now and wanting to do the right thing. But yeah, there's a lot of like daring in this. Like if you look at like the first murder, like Uma Thurman daring him to kill her, basically.
Yeah.
It's really like, again, upsetting and funny. The one that sticks out to me is the second murder as the most comical in a way.
Yeah.
Where it's showing his obsessive compulsive disorder, how he gets in the car and he's like imagining blood.
Yeah.
Like behind the painting, and then he basically dares the cop to catch him. Like, I want you to check every inch of this room.
Yeah.
And the cop doesn't even question, like, why is this guy here? Like, it almost seems dreamlike. And then that whole scene ends with him dragging this corpse through the city and behind his van, and it's funny.
And then the rain comes and washes it away, you know?
Right.
And once again, it's the whole fucking Trump allegory where it's like, you know, Trump's going out there doing like, you know, horrible, evil things, and someone washes it away and makes him, you know, squeaky clean in the eyes of the public. And it's, you know, it's pretty, when you think of it that way. And I'm not one of these, I mean, I hate Donald Trump, and I'm not one of these guys who's like looking every, you know, possible place to, you know, find things, but you don't have to look very hard. And I think this movie on some level operates as an allegory for not, you know, the United States in this last 4 years of its political life, you know.
That's a really interesting one. This movie came out in 2017, right? So Donald Trump would have just been elected.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, that's
so that
the year two.
Doesn't seem like that doesn't seem like a far-fetched theory at all. I mean, I certainly didn't get that out of it, but that's really interesting.
I don't know if it's true or not. That's just like what I see, maybe as like, because like there's so many levels to this movie, you know, and then there's also just Von Trier kind of trolling his critics too. You know, everyone's like,
that's what I got out of it for sure.
Yeah, and it's great. I love it. You know,
me too. I love it when he's like talking about great art and he's showing clips from stuff he's done in the past.
Yeah, there's scenes from Nymphomaniac and, you know, other films. It's great. And
yeah,
also,
Nymphomaniac did nothing for me, but yeah.
I didn't like that one either. It was like very self-indulgent. I really liked Melancholia. I thought that was great. Antichrist I really enjoyed, and like his older films too from the 90s I really liked too.
The one I was thinking about specifically that was like a comment on America, the one with Nicole Kidman.
Oh, Dogville
or something. I can't remember.
Yeah, that one.
I really hated that. That was one of the few films I couldn't make it through. Like I shut off halfway through.
That was the one that was like a play almost, right?
Right. Yeah, and like everyone's standing like there's chalk to mark where things are. It didn't do anything for me. I could appreciate that he was either trying to do something different or trolling everyone. But yeah, it did nothing for me. I thought he hit like a kind of a new stride with Antichrist, and you just kind of see this like new phase of his career. Like every film he's made since then has similarities to it as far as style and tone. Like even like Nymphomaniac feels like a horror movie to me.
Yeah, it does. It's like, you know, it's like an extreme film, you know, and even though like there's no like supernatural elements in it, there's a extremity to it that, you know, even like a lot of those French extreme films don't really have like a supernatural element to it, but there's just like crazy shit that goes on that is horrific. Hence, it becomes part of like the horror film genre, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, you could say all of his films seem like an allegory for something. Like, I remember my first time through Antichrist, it felt to me like a movie just about depression and didn't necessarily make a lot of sense, but that's what I got out of it. Yeah,
I agree with that. And, but yeah, the vibe of that movie, and there's the scenes and the feeling you get when you watch that film was, and just the performances and the fact that it was essentially just Willem Dafoe and Charlotte Gainsbourg.
Gainsbourg,
yeah, the French pop singer, and actress.
Is she a pop singer?
Oh yeah, she's got like a whole bunch of records out, man. Her music's really cool. I like her music.
Oh wow, see, I didn't know that.
Yeah, see, over here in the States, we only know her as an actress, but in Europe, she's a famous singer.
That's interesting. And the role she chooses to take, I mean, it's pretty daring. I mean, I know there's supposedly there's porn doubles for all the sex scenes, but they're still superimposing her face over it, so it looks real. And if you're not in the know, you're gonna think it's real.
I would like to think that it actually was Charlotte Gainsbourg that performed all the X-rated scenes, but you just
it seems like it is, isn't it?
You just ruined my fantasy about that.
No, I mean, I've read articles about we digitally encode, we can just stunt double or sex doubles or whatever, and we superimpose her face over it. But I was like, that is pretty convincing. Because you watch The Irishman, that shit isn't that convincing, and they had a lot of money.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That was, so maybe it was Charlotte Gainsbourg doing all that stuff. I mean, I'd like to think
maybe
that,
we'll never know, I guess, unless one of us talks to Lars von Trier directly, which could happen. It could happen.
Hey, it's more likely that you will than I will, but yeah.
Doubtful, but yeah, maybe I'll run into him out here. He'll decide he's not afraid of flying anymore, and I'll run into him at Whole Foods.
At Whole Foods.
that movie was LA thing people do.
That movie was shot in Sweden, I think. The house that Jack built, and it's funny because when I was watching it, I was thinking to myself, "This looks like Europe," Like there's something about it.
Did you really?
Yeah, the van looks like a European van. I thought just the countryside looked like a European countryside to me, and it turns out that it was shot in Sweden. And I believe that the site where his house was supposed to be, because they mentioned Mount St. Helens, so I was assuming that it was supposed to be in Washington State somewhere.
Right, I thought it was Oregon, but
Northwest.
I could be wrong. Yeah, that's interesting you say that, because watching this, I felt like it felt authentic. This felt like it could be like some small town in Oregon. And I know that it was filmed in Europe, but I found it very convincing. It reminded me, I started to think about the movie The Ghost Rider by Roman Polanski. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I haven't seen that.
It's great. But it really looks like small town Massachusetts. They nailed it. And it wasn't filmed there, obviously, because Roman Polanski can't come into the United States.
Right.
So that just popped into my head, it's pretty convincing, because a lot of times when you don't film on location, you can tell. Like, one of the things that bugged me about The Departed was it was filmed in New York. And if you lived in Boston, you can tell a lot it's not Boston.
Yeah, well, there's a specific scene that actually is in the neighborhood I used to live in. There's the scene in the grocery store where Leonardo DiCaprio beats up those guys from Providence.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, the exterior is a place that's actually in Greenpoint and Greenpoint, Williamsburg. Like it's in this that borderland between Williamsburg and Greenpoint, right by McCarran Park. And it used to actually, I'm not sure what it is now because I don't live in that neighborhood anymore. But it used to be this restaurant that had this kind of like old school, old timey like look on the outside. And that grocery store, the interior is definitely different, but the exterior was this place by the park. And I know it's all shot in New York, except for some of the scenes do look like the Long Wharf area in downtown Boston. So I don't know. Maybe they filmed something.
Yeah, they did a couple. They did do a couple shots like exteriors in Boston, but only a couple. It always irked me. I always thought that was a really odd choice, but otherwise that's a great movie. But Anyway, back to my original point. Was House of Jack Bill was pretty convincing. It looked American to me. It's interesting we got something completely different out of it.
Yeah. I don't know. It just looked like one of those places that you drive through on tour in like Northern Europe, you know. And I guess parts of Washington remind me of the same thing too. So it was a good, you know, stand-in for Washington State, Oregon, you know, eastern, western, the Northwest, the Pacific Northwest.
Sure. Let's talk about Matt Dillon. I mean, this guy's been acting forever. This seems like the best I've seen him in forever.
Yeah, I agree, man. And it made me think about how, I mean, I guess it's probably a choice of his why he's not acting in more films. But I mean, I think he's one of, like, he definitely defined himself as a great actor in this film. And it made me think, man, I'd like to see more of Matt Dillon. But I don't know if I want to see him acting in any blockbuster films or anything. But if he just was more active in these kind of artsy films, I'd love to see that.
Right. The last thing I remember seeing him was some awful TV show. It was kind of spooky, M. Night Shyamalan-ish. I can't remember the name, but it was pretty bad. And it was good to see him pop up in this and give this performance. I mean, it's pretty. This seems like a role like a more popular actor's agent would tell them not to take.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that might ruin your career doing this role.
Right, but he is just like he's spot on in this.
Yeah, I thought he did a great job, and like you were saying, in this climate, you know, that a role like that, you know, because people don't know how to differentiate art from reality, might stigmatize him in the eyes of certain people, you know. And I'm sure this movie was like a huge, you know, there was like a big uproar, I imagine, with the you know, blogging, you know, Cheeto finger bloggers out there. Probably
well,
they probably had a lot to say about this film, you know.
Oh, sure. Well, it has 57% on Rotten Tomatoes, so pretty split down the middle about what people thought about it. And, you know, you see a lot of, like, really the negative reviews tend to be very negative. Like, why do you need to make this kind of movie in this kind of climate? And I think that's why Lars von Trier does make the kind of movies he makes, because he wants to give people the middle finger.
I think that the fact that people even ask a question like that is fucking stupid. Like, why do you need to make a film like this in this climate? It's like, well, why does anyone need to do anything? Because it's inside them. And, you know, these people out there who are writing in their blogs, you know, about all these films and being offended. And first of all, I'm going to say that it's all virtue signaling. It's all like, well, look at me. Look how like progressive and quote unquote woke I am because I hate this movie.
Right.
So it makes me elevated somehow. But the bottom line is, like, everyone's different. People have like a dark side, man. And it's like, you have to express that just as much as you expect all the bunnies and feel good movies and female empowerment films out there. There has to be something else to compare that to, you know what I mean? Otherwise, there'd
Sure.
be like nothing, you know. I mean, there'd be a void of just one particular thing.
I feel like there should be room for everything to exist. Even this, you know, even like something that doesn't interest me at all, or like I finally like roll my eyes at. It's not for me, but it's for someone else, and it should exist. And anytime you think, you start to say things like you just said, like, oh, this doesn't belong in this climate, or like, you know, you need to, like, a studio will make a director remove a scene from their movie because it'll remind people of the shooting that happened last week. You know, things like that sort of censoring is like that people can't handle, you know, fiction.
Yeah. And I think it's a disservice to people because I think that if you're so fucking weak-willed that a piece of art will offend you and damage your psyche, you know, I think that you deserve to be fucking damaged. You know what I mean? Because you need to, like, build up resistances. You need to, like, experience things. You need to go out there and condition yourself to stuff. You know what I mean? It's like,
Sure.
Or you could just run away and hide and pretend things don't exist. And I think that's what like
Right.
intense extreme films are exercising that part of our reality. You know, it's like all horrible things exist in the world, you know, and art reflects that too. And, you know, just because you choose to work within a medium that expresses that doesn't mean that you share those viewpoints. You're just making a commentary. You're illustrating that these things exist.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, even take away any sort of political agenda, I can really see how someone wouldn't like this. This is a tough,
Totally.
watch, and it's long. Just like Martyrs, it's not for me. I didn't enjoy watching it at all. Too much for me.
Yeah, fair enough.
So I can see how this movie might be too much. Two scenes in particular, oddly enough, with all the carnage with humans, the scene where he cuts the duckling's feet off was deeply upsetting to me.
I agree.
And I think that would be like the tipping point for a lot of people who watch this, even after you've already seen a few people murdered like that. That's just, you know, really upsetting.
Yeah, and
even as a child,
you kind of hit the nail on the head with the fact that, you know, if it's not to your taste, you know, like you said, Martyrs wasn't to your taste, and that's fair. That's a totally valid opinion. But that doesn't mean that your agenda should supersede everyone else's agenda and tell them that they can't be into that either. You know, I mean, there's a lot of horrible music out there that I don't like. But if someone's telling me that I have to like, you know, Usher or something like that, or, you know, fucking Run the Jewels or some shit like that, then I would be offended by that you have to listen to Run the Jewels, you know. And I know.
Well, Mike, you do.
But I don't want to, man. I don't want to listen to that kind of stuff, you know.
I actually really like that.
No, I know. That's a band that a lot of people like, but I fucking can't stand. So whatever.
I get it.
And that doesn't make me racist. It doesn't make me a misogynist. It doesn't make me anything but a guy who doesn't particularly like that band. And that's totally fine, at least in the world that I inhabit.
I noticed, like, critics more lately seem to be driven by an agenda more than just reviewing what they see. And I understand you put your own thoughts and opinions and ideologies into what you're watching. But then there's this element that, like, you're wrong if you like it. Like, the whole thing about the Joker, like, it became like a joke. Oh, you like that movie? Oh, you must fucking work out in your basement all the time. Or, like,
I do those things. Yeah. I lift weights. Yeah. I like watch the Joker. I lift weights. I eat meat. And I practice how to beat people up every day. So yeah, I guess I do fit the toxic male vibe. You know what I mean?
Right. The other thing I point of the other upsetting part of the movie that I think people might think is too much is I believe, is it the third or fourth murder where he kills his the girl he's dating and her two children.
Yeah, that's that you know, it's funny. I had this talk. The scene with Riley Keough was brutal. You know,
that was hard to watch.
I found it really disturbing when he killed the family and mutilated Grumpy, the child. Like that was the part.
And the part is so funny.
It's funny, but
like with the kids smiling like grotesquely.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Like the voiceover, if you took the voiceover out, it would be almost unwatchable, I think. How intense and brutal that scene is. But with the voiceover, it adds an element of humor to it, which enables you to actually watch the scene. You know? And but that, once again, not for everybody. I understand it if you don't want to watch something like that, and I'm not going to criticize you. I'm going to question some of the things about myself that draw me to these things. But you know,
I mean,
it's part of the fucking continuum of reality that we live in. You know, you have these things and you have other things, and it's not for everyone. But that scene, that particular segment of the film really disturbed me. Like, and later I kept thinking about it, and it was fucking heavy, you know.
yeah, absolutely. And, it's one of the reasons I put this in my top 10 of the decade, because it really got a reaction out of me. Like, when I was done watching it, that's pretty much all I was thinking about.
Yeah.
For the next few days. And what really set it over the edge is, after 2 hours of this insanity, it kind of dips into surrealism with this epilogue in hell. Like, you assume like the cops shot him down or whatever. It's not shown. It's just sort of implied. And then you think the movie is like, okay, maybe a few minutes left, but it goes on for another half hour. You see this journey deep into hell. And at the end, he tries to escape, and to no avail. He's just gone deeper into hell. Who knows? But and all of that is. Then it ends with "Hit the Road, Jack," this fucking goofy, upbeat song. I mean,
yeah. I mean, I think that I like the connection in the literature with it turns into Dante's Inferno, where Virgil, the Roman poet, leads Jack on his own adventure through the 9 circles of hell. I mean, they skip all the, gluttony and, they just sort of summarize his descent. And there's a scene where he sees like heaven, Elysium, the Elysian fields. And Virgil is like, that we don't have access to that. And then you see the regret in Jack's face, where he's like, oh man, I was like going wild my entire life, and now it's not going to turn out so well for me. Now it's time to pay the piper. Now it's time to get your real comeuppance. So,
right.
Yeah. Then he's like, has all this sort of ego and bravado where like Virgil brings him to that bridge, and he's like, on the other side is a pathway that's out of hell and up, as he put it. And then Jack's like, well, let me try my hand at this. Let me see if I can navigate this pit. And he ends up falling into the abyss. And it's that scene is like sort of like, well, there's consequences to your action, man. And I think that despite all of the depravity in the movie, that scene kind of brings it full circle to this kind of moral play. That, well, if you want to run wild, you got to, there's consequences to everything that you do. And in Jack's case, there's consequences to a life of murder and, brutality, is that he gets to spend eternity either falling through this black abyss or roasting in this inferno,
Right. And like, even in Deth, his hubris knows no boundaries. He thinks he can, I'll just give it a shot. Like you said, I can do this. And right, he's bound to a horrible eternity. And it's a powerful ending. I didn't feel the least bit sorry for Jack at the end. He got what he deserved.
Yeah. I think that for Von Trier, to make a film like that and have it end that way is sort of just like showing the ignorance of his detractors in some ways. He's like, all right, look, guys, I'm going to spell it out in bold, black and white. And if you're too much of a fucking idiot to see that what I'm saying, then you're lost. You know what I mean? It's like, okay,
sure,
you do these things, there's consequences. Most likely you're going to go to hell. And that's kind of how that's what I think his message was that, and that's why I love the film, man. Had I seen it within the decade, this would have been my number one too, Jeff. So I
interesting. Yeah.
You know, because I like
Well,
all
I'm really,
the literary
really
stuff.
glad you liked it.
Yeah, I like all the literary tie-ins. I like the philosophical angle. I like the allegories, you know, and all the symbolism and of course just like the fine production of it and the expert craftsmanship that Von Trier has as a filmmaker.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even if you hated the movie, you can appreciate it on a technical level. This is one of I think it might be his best directorial effort for sure.
Yeah, man.
And it comes together really well. And again, it's 2.5 hours long. It's a brutal watch. But I went back and watched it again when I was trying to think of my 10 best of the decade. And it was a tough watch the second time around, but if it was just like nihilism, this would be a garbage movie, but it's so much more than that.
Yeah, you know, and sadly, people don't see past that, and they just think that, well, it's a study in depravity and nihilism, so I'm going to dismiss it as an exploitation film or something like that. You know what I mean? And that sucks, you know?
Yeah, you saw a lot of that with Joker as well. Like, this is just exercise in nihilism and male rage when, you know, I saw a little bit more to it than that.
Since our last talk, I went out and watched a bunch of films that I hadn't seen that were on your top 10 list there. So one of them was Enemy, which was outstanding, I thought.
Great movie.
Honeymoon, which was great, and featured the dude who played Victor Frankenstein in Penny Dreadfuls, the series on Showtime, which I really dug. And that redheaded lady who was in Game of Thrones, who played one of the wildlings. So that was a plus. That movie was great. Had a very kind of downer ending, and was also a little bit of a Lovecraftian kind of film too.
Sure. Yeah, this sort of outside influence, you know, comes from maybe from outer space.
Exactly. They never really, define it, you know.
Right, and it just kind of completely transforms this person. I love Honeymoon. I love that it was a small scale. This woman is overtaken by this thing, and it's not this generic horror movie where he has to track down something to save her and stop the bad guys. It's bad things happen, and then it's over.
Yeah, basically.
And that's a hallmark of great horror.
Yeah.
Glad you liked it. I feel kind of guilty because I didn't watch anything.
No,
I didn't see it.
I didn't expect you to, but yeah, that movie was great. And but the real crowning film, which this would have been I didn't catch this the first time within the time period, but yeah, was The House That Jack Built. I thought that was fucking amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I said it last time, but that's a movie I would have expected that you've seen multiple times.
Thanks for tuning in, guys. As usual, it's a great time hanging out with Jeff, talking about movies. We're going to be doing these things from time to time, hopefully on a more or less regular basis. So really enjoy this. Hope you guys enjoy it. And I'll see you all next time. Take care.